Salam Sejahtera and welcome to another edition of Perception, where we discuss current issues that are daily topics of concerned discussion among multicultural Malaysians of all walks of life. Ladies and gentlemen, our topic of discussion on this edition of Perception is entitled Past Today. To discuss this topic, we have with us today the Associate Professor of Political Science at Singapore Management University, Professor Bridget Welsh. On behalf of TV Pass, I sincerely thank you for taking time and being with us to discuss our topic for this week.
Thank you very much, Gilbert.
Prof, the impending 13th general elections has forced all political parties to postpone their party elections, with the exception of one. That one exception to the rule is PAS. They proceeded with their party elections as scheduled. What does this say of the resilience and maturity of the PAS political culture? Are they not the true democrats of the Malaysian political landscape?
I think they're one of many that are also democratic. I think generally you've seen across the opposition landscape the openness of the democratic process within the election terrain. This was true of Keadilan, who had their party election last year, and of course also to a certain degree among DAP, but also among PAS. And I think what is interesting about the PAS elections was the broadening of democratic process within the party. For example, in the Muslimat division, you saw people from the floor electing the new leaders in a more open process, which is a break from the past in regard. So you have an opening up and a deepening of the democratic process in the elections. You also see, I think, in the results, to a certain degree, a recognition for the need to engage in the democratic process. If there is one message from the results, is that the membership sees elections as a critical importance for the future of the country. And that's why they've elected a team that is geared towards the next elections.
Okay. Prof, the wisdom of the delegates attending the 57th Muktamar saw the election of a non-ulama as a deputy president, and the same pattern prevailed for the three vice presidents. What is your understanding on the wisdom of the past delegates at this Muktamar?
I think there are two things that I think are broadly going on. First, I think they wanted people who could represent the party to the general public. I think the new leadership team, which includes Hadi Awang as an ulama at the presidency, even though he was uncontested, but he is part of the team, is portraying a PAS that knows how to engage society, engage Malaysia. And so in order for the party to pick up support and for the party to be understood by Malaysians, you needed a team that could communicate well with the rest of the country. And this team does that. I think there's an acknowledgement that you need to stop talking internally among yourselves, but to talk to Malaysia as a whole in order to represent the country. The other factor that I think is important to appreciate is that the delegates were of a certain age. Many of them came into politics in the Reformasi generation, after 1998, 1999. And if you look across the cohort of people who were voting, they have a vision of change for the country. And so they're willing to make a bold step towards change. Not just change for PAS, where you have a non-ulama leaders at the top compared to the past, but you also have a leadership that is aiming to promote different ideas and to communicate different ideas, to change the understanding of PAS, but to have a PAS also to evolve in a different way. So these two things, the sense of pragmatic recognition of the elections, in a sense of finding technical, good team that represent the party, as well as a sense of wanting change and reform and to push forward a more reformasi idea are crucial.
Prof, the prevailing perception is that the election of Saudara Mat Sabu as the Deputy President, as well as the 3 Vice Presidents, is akin to a declaration of affirmation to past commitment in Pakatan Rakyat, and its perceived political flirtation with UMNO to set up a unity government is good as dead and buried now. What is your analysis on the matter?
I think you've covered it well, Gilbert. I think in the sense that the UG group is no longer seen in the larger composition of the leadership from the perspective of those that were elected. And it doesn't extend just to the main positions, it also extends to the Central Committee. If we look at the composition of those who were elected, I think the message was sent that their idea that PAS will be working with UMNO, at least in the short term, is dead and buried.
Prof, if we borrow the vocabulary of football, the election of Saudara Mat Sabu and the 3 Vice Presidents, as well as the committee at large, it would be hailed as a Barcelona dream team strike force to do political battle with UMNO at the 13th general elections. What is your estimation and expectation of this team?
Well, to use your analogy in using football, Mat Sabu is the midfielder. He holds the rear of the party in the history, having played a major role in the activism for almost 3 or 4 decades now, in his role in the party. But at the same time, he is also knows how to move forward in terms of the attack. His focus, in terms of what was discussed at the Muktamar, focuses on questions of governance, questions of process in the elections, and the sense of wanting to make the system fairer and more equitable. And he plays that pivotal role as a midfielder. But you have, as part of the team, I think other positions that I think are very important. Husa Musa's role in Kelantan government, I think, is crucial for the electorate to understand that PAS has experience in governance, and at the same juncture thinks quite new and innovatively about economic policy. He plays an important forward position in terms of showing that PAS is concerned about multiple things that affect people, not just questions of religion, which do matter and are still very much part of the PAS leadership, but also pragmatic issues involving what are the bread and butter concerns of the overall electorate. The other 2 vice presidents, Mahfuz and Salahuddin, come from the party rank and file. They are known to be very strategic in terms of mobilizing people and good communicators. And so they play an important part of the forward team operations. But I think it will be not just the vice presidents and Mat Sabu, but the larger team. And I think this idea of teamwork is absolutely crucial. That I think that the problems that Malaysia face are multifaceted. And in order for this to be addressed by any political party, by Pakatan or by PAS or by UMNO even, you need a good group of people who share ideas, who communicate well, and who are willing to innovate and take risks and adopt different types of strategies. This is what makes a good football team work. You need a good defense and a good offense, but you need to be able to work together as a team or you can't win. And in order for PAS to be effective, that you need to have this teamwork. And this is very important from this election. I think that one of the things that, even though I think a lot of the media is making this distinction that there is this ulama versus Erdogan faction discussion, yes, there are differences, but I think that the team that was elected represents people who can work together. And I think this cooperative spirit is absolutely essential, not just working within PAS, but also working with a larger people of Malaysia that are the most important, because remember, this is not about political parties. This is about the future of Malaysia and the people within it.
Okay, Prof. As far as the personality of Saudara Mat Sabu, he comes from a totally different background than his predecessor. While his predecessor was viewed as docile and passive, what do you think Saudara Mat Sabu will give to the deputy presidency of PAS?
I think there are three things that stand out. He's a wonderful communicator. In terms of the orators in Malaysia, across the political spectrum, Mat Sabu is among the top. He has an ability to communicate with not only the grassroots, but also with people outside of the party, from all walks of life, be it from professional points of view, from people in the grassroots and living in the kampung, to a more, even an international audience. That communication skills is wonderful. And I think this is important because I think there's not a clear sense of what are the issues and what are the concerns and what are the policy initiatives. So the first thing is communication. The second thing that I think is that Mat Sabu represents is he has a history of standing up for his ideals. And I think Malaysia, as it transforms, is looking for leaders that provide hope. People are looking to the future. They're looking for a sense of what can be better for their lives. And they look for people who have integrity. And Mat Sabu offers that in many key ways because of his involvement in activism, his willingness to stand up at personal sacrifice. He's been in jail. And this is something that very few people can really appreciate until they've had to suffer the circumstances of having to face the struggle. And I think the third thing is that, and even though it's important to recognize that Mat Sabu won this election as a vice president, he won it very closely. And he has the ability to bridge groups. He has to, right? He only won by 21 votes. So he has to build a team and work together. And I think that from the perspective of the evolution of the party, you have now a strengthening of not individuals, but or even specific states. You have a strengthening of people across the country in many different ways. And I think that's important. This idea of cooperation, this idea of idealism and hope, and this idea of communication are essential for this new position.
Okay, Prof. Prof, one of the highlights of the 57th PAS Muktamar was PAS' decision to harness and focus as its top priority the creation of a caring government rather than the establishment of an Islamic state. Is this a giant step forward or otherwise?
I think it is an important evolution in the thinking. I think it represents an evolution in a number of ways. First, it talks about the importance of activism in the sense of people taking responsibility for their actions. So whether or not it's through, for example, what is called the care squad, this idea of volunteerism, or whether or not it's through the sense of coming up with policies that address people. This is absolutely essential from a perspective of changing the way that politicians and the government engages. It's about bringing people into the equation in their multifacetedness. The discussion of Islamic State focused exclusively on moral issues. While moral issues remain important, I think that they also alienate many people because they are seen to be telling people how to behave, as opposed to empowering people to choose how they behave. What you're doing now by talking about a welfare state is giving the people the ingredients to have a better quality of life that allow them to make more informed choices about morality, about family. And so the areas that are included involve questions of basic income, job opportunities, questions associated with healthcare, questions of sense of community, not whether or not it's the family, but also the broader sense of connections in society, and taking responsibility for others. And so you see a number of initiatives that have already been started that I think reflect this kind of evolving concept, where you talk about increasing conditions for single mothers, which you find a number of programs that past governments have introduced, both in Kelantan in particular. Also issues have been discussed in questions in Kedah. Insurance schemes that have helped to protect people when they lose their job or when they have someone has passed away in the family. And it can't just be about giving from the government. It's also about people empowering themselves to change their lives. So it's not just a top-down process. It's about one that is more inclusive. And I think this is quite an innovative type of dimension of what is happening. Because Malaysia has struggled, I think, as a country, from the perspective that the government should solve everything. But the new Malaysia is about the government and the people cooperating, and the people's voices being heard and appreciated and respected. And so for this evolution of PAS to have this idea of a more caring, a more welfare-oriented government, it indicates there's an appreciation of the inclusion of ordinary voices inside government and the ordinary concerns and struggles of people inside government. And in many ways, this is crosses the barriers of all religions. Islam, Catholicism, Hinduism, Buddhism. Right? These are things that are national in scope. It's not just Islamic, although there are many elements that are Islam. These ideas come from the discussions that are happening in the Islamic world globally.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, we will take a short break now and return shortly.
No problem.
To our respected audience, we trust you will be with us when we return and continue our discussion on this edition of Perception entitled PAS Today with Professor Bridget Welsh. Welcome back to Perception, where we will continue our discussion with Professor Bridget Welsh on PAS Today. Prof, UMNO projects itself as the champion of the Malays, while PAS is the undisputed Islamic champion. It is a political competition between race and religion, although both UMNO and PAS come from the same race and religion. What is your perception of this paradoxical political enigma between UMNO and PAS?
I think that one of the struggles that Malaysia faces is that the focus still remains heavily on ethnic politics. Whether or not you're talking about race or religion, it's painted as a zero-sum game between the Malay community and the other communities. And this is not healthy for the country, because you need to evolve outside of an old parochial kind of racial mindset in order to evolve the country. Malaysia faces a struggle economically to increase its level of development, increase its wages. It also needs to move beyond a country that is focused in terms of its income level in the middle range. And in order to move economically and psychologically to a sense of appreciation of being Malaysians, you need to move out of the ethnic politics realm. And in this way, I think that PAS, by adopting some of its new strategies, helps to move Malaysia in a more forward-looking direction, where it is more inclusive. In the last few years, especially the last year or so, there's been a lot of difficult discussions about race relations. And these things do not build a sense of security among all the communities. Whether or not you're Malay, you're Chinese, you're Indian, you're Iban, you're Kedazan, Dusun, whatever it is. people who live in fear and insecurity don't feel comfortable. And so the evolution of this contestation from one that is purely race and religion to one that is about the policies, the programs, and the society that people want to live in is an absolutely essential step for the forward movement of the country.
Okay. Prof, PAS has two popular infectious taglines. One is PAS for all, and the other is PAS ganti UMNO. My question is whether PAS is projecting and posturing itself right to the Malaysian electorate.
I think that there's always going to be a process of evolution. PAS is facing an internal struggle to move from a perspective that is more parochial, more focused on one community or a specific narrow interpretation, to a broader one that is more inclusive and more national. The fact of the matter is, for good or for bad, PAS will never win the majority of the country by itself. It needs to work with other opposition parties in order to represent communities. Because there is a lack of trust, a lack of understanding, there's a lack of appreciation. And this has nothing to do with PAS. It's the historical evolution of politics in this country. Whether or not it involves race relations, whether or not it involves the religious issues or differences, there are different outlooks. So you need to have a coalition system that represents others. So while PAS aims to be inclusive, there'll always be limits to that inclusion, because not everyone feels comfortable with a religious agenda that is not their own. And that is understandable. If the things were reversed, people would feel the same way. The second element in terms of moving against UMNO, I think you have also a divided society. One has to appreciate that UMNO has historically played a very important role in this country. They've helped to develop the country. They have served to represent leaders and represent people. They have had a record of some good leaders that have really transformed the country and put Malaysia globally on the map. So in a sense, they will always have their loyal followers. I think at this particular juncture, the question becomes for UMNO, how is UMNO going to evolve? At this particular juncture, you now see that UMNO has new leadership, but the party itself is not evolving. And the electorate in Malaysia has become more sophisticated. They want to see not the same messages. They want to see a system that is more equitable, that is actually more open, that there's less corruption, that there is less elitism, that ordinary people can rise to the system. So in PAS, UMNO has been a long contestation since the roots of PAS itself, and since the roots of it's not going to go away. But what I think is interesting is to see how the two parties are evolving or not. In a sense, the question becomes whether or not UMNO is going to evolve out of the old mold into something new in order to reflect the changes that PAS is evolving. And unfortunately, at this particular juncture, UMNO has not been seen to be moving forward. They seem to be focused very much on similar old messages of development, of patronage, of basically providing a government that is actually selectively giving out benefits. They hold on very strongly to the NEP policy, which in itself had some successes, but also needs to be reformed to be more effective. And so the question is, who has the new ideas? Who offers the new ideas to people? And this is where the PAS-UMNO struggle comes in. There is now a heavy burden being placed on the new leadership. The issue that the leadership in PAS faces is one of expectation and of delivery. It's a lot for the new leaders to take on. Because, why is that? Because now, whether or not it's a new UMNO Prime Minister such as Najib Tun Razak, or whether or not it was Abdullah Badawi, or whether or not it is the leadership in the opposition, Malaysians want more and expect more from their government. they're more engaged, they demand more. So the burden on the parties is high. And this is something that I think, as we see the political evolution of the country, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong to want a better society. There's nothing wrong to want a better country. But it puts the struggle on the parties and the discourse, which is often quite shallow, to shame, because the discourse is not keeping up with the sophistication of the people.
Prof, adding to what you said, if we take the 57th past Muktamar, what in your mind was past most compelling message?
It's a good question. I think it's difficult to identify two, but I will point to three, because as academics we tend to talk too much and we tend to number these things, but let me put them as I see it. First, I think that the first was the results, the willingness to take risks, the willingness to change, to move, and to evolve from the past. No, it doesn't, at least for 2 years. The thing about these parties' elections is they're only for 2 years. So if it doesn't work, then it can go back. But at least for the short juncture, right, you have this willingness, and it was quite a decisive mandate for a different evolution. That, I think, is quite bold. You know, this perception that Malaysians are conservative and that they're not risk averse. In fact, the delegates in PAS showed a willingness to take a risk, number one. The second thing that I thought was very interesting is this idea of what we call a caring government, or a welfare state, which is a kind of active, new government. And I think this reflects something that is global, the desire to improve quality of life for ordinary people. Whether or not you see this in Cairo in the Middle East, where the people rose up, or Tunisia, or whether or not you saw it most recently in Singapore, where people said, okay, it's not just about how much you're growing the economy, it's about what you're giving me in terms of my quality of life, and whether or not you're engaging and including me. And so the welfare state idea of inclusion and quality of life is very important. It still seems to be in a nascent form. I mean, in a sense, it needs to be fleshed out, and we need to see the policies that are associated with it. But it's a very innovative type of idea. The third thing that resonated, what I thought was very interesting, involves the issue of economic opportunities. And this, I speak to the part of the speech that was not really covered very much, that Hadi Wang spoke about the need to allow the private sector and competition to come in. When we look at the issues of questions of subsidies, there's a lot of recent discussion about the issues of monopolies. Who controls what? Who are the supply chain in the larger economy? And I think this issue of opening up economic space to allow ordinary people, ordinary traders, ordinary lorry drivers, ordinary people who are trying to set up the small nasi lemak shops, nasi ayam shops, to have a fair access to goods in an open market is actually extremely important. Because as Malaysia moves forward, the government cannot continue to be the highest level of employer. It cannot afford it. The government cannot continue to be giving out money. Right? Eventually the oil is going to run out. So where is it going to come from? You need to have the power of the people in the economy. You need to empower local individual actors in the private sector. And it can't just be about people winning contracts. It has to be about people delivering quality goods that are on the open marketplace, that show that people can actually have good skills and actually offer good products. But until the system moves to a fairer type of system for ordinary people, then you don't have a system that actually works in a fairer system. And what I thought was interesting, resonated, was this element about bringing in more economic competition, the marketplace, and reducing the monopoly controls over the supply chain in the economy. This is a very powerful element. It's a different vision. Mahathir spoke about building entrepreneurs, but he did it by selectively giving people certain access to companies and others. And some performed and some didn't. But many of them became very wealthy and not many people, there was not that much trickle down. Now it's a different system.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, one final question. In a nutshell, how would you compare past today with past of yesterdays?
I think it's still a rural-based party. But you have now, I think, a pendulum shift towards a more cosmopolitan party, at least in the short term. And I think PAS has, working through Pakatan, engaged more effectively with non-Muslims and learned and shown that they're willing to learn. But there still is the sense of, among some of the members, a lack of exposure, a lack of understanding. And I think as this moves forward, in terms of if the new team is successful, you're going to see a kind of more globalization of PAS, moving out of the kind of focus only on the kampung life. And this is the difference between a more traditional lifestyle that is seen as not part of a global exchange, or a more global, more cosmopolitan party that represents the changes that are happening in the Muslim world. Because it's true, across the world, what we've seen are that Muslims are democratic, that Muslims are empowered, and Muslims are diverse, creative, full of more professionals. And I think PAS reflects those changes in Malaysia that we find in other parts of the world, be it Indonesia, be it Egypt.
Prof, it has been really enlightening having you with us on this edition of Perception to discuss PAS today. On behalf of TV PAS, I sincerely thank you for taking your time and being with us.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you.
To our respected audience, we thank you for being with us throughout this discussion. Wherever you may be, I wish you a pleasant weekend and a productive week ahead. On behalf of the production crew of Perception, until we meet again next week, I wish all Malaysians Hidup Rakyat, Hidup Pakatan Rakyat.